Some of you have asked for help with fantasy football related questions, and I haven't really answered a whole lot of them, in part because I haven't been doing season long fantasy football this year. It's the first year in years that I haven't done so, and I don't really envision going back to it. And the simple reason being is that now I've shifted my attention and focused all of my energy to daily or weekly fantasy football via DraftKings and FanDuel, primarily in my case, DraftKings. I like the site better. I like the contest better. I like their variety better. I like the lower cost in some of their contests better. DraftKings is my way to go. Some of you may be FanDuel. Some of you might be DraftKings. Some of you might not be either at all. So I decided to come on here and start giving you some advice, some opinions on weekly DraftKings Millionaire Maker picks, guys to really explore putting into your lineups. Not guys we're looking at sitting or whatever the case, but focusing on the guys that could potentially return you the best bang for the salary cap dollar and the guys that could help you at least win some money and hopefully in some of your cases, a lot of money. Now, just to speak on my experiences with playing DraftKings from an NFL side so far this year, every week I've at least won some money. Some weeks has been more than others. There are weeks where I bring back maybe $20 net, weeks of $50. Then there will be weeks where it's $100 or $150. Had a week a little while back where it was $400. And then 2 weeks ago, if you follow me on Twitter, you know I came 9/10 of a point away from tying for first in the Sunday night, Monday night primetime contest and winning $35,000. I won $2,100 instead. So I have some experience at least winning some money, and I hope that my advice can at least help some of you win some money. I don't know if it's ever going to help any of you win the big Millionaire Maker pot, and if it does, then please cut me in about 5 or 10%. That would be greatly appreciated and a good show of respect. Nonetheless, I think my advice could at least help some of you win some money, maybe help some of you decide to give DraftKings or daily fantasy sports a try. If you've been playing fantasy football for years and you do the lame season-long leagues where you don't win any money, it's all about pride. Why not take a few bucks and gamble and roll the dice and see if you can win some real money? What the hell, why not? So here's what I'm going to do in this video, and once a week, probably on every Saturday, is I'm going to come on here and look at the 5 different positions that you have in the lineup on DraftKings. You have a total of, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You have a quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, a flex, and a defense/special team. So 9 positions. You have to stay under a $50,000 salary cap, so it means you can devote a little more than average of $5,000 per position. So there are different strategies in play, and I'll go over those in videos to come in the future to kind of help some of you guys out in terms of strategizing, trying to figure out where to go, where to tie your salary cap money into, where you can maybe skip out on some. We'll go over all of that. But for now, at least for this video, let me just give you some picks for this week at each of the positions. And for quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends, and wide receivers, I'm going to give you a high dollar pick or two, a middle-of-the-road dollar pick or two, and then maybe some low-dollar sleepers that can outperform their salary that they're showing and help you win some money. Now, we'll start off with the quarterback position. Now, I know there's a lot of temptation to play the big-name, big-money elite guys like the Tom Brady's and the Drew Breeses and the Aaron Rodgers. And to be fair, you look at Drew Brees last week, he won a lot of people a lot of money. We know that for sure. He put up almost 50 points on DraftKings. He won people a shit ton of money. And looking at his matchup against Tennessee, it seems appealing. Aaron Rodgers doesn't really play poor back-to-back games. He has a great history following a loss of playing really, really well. So even his matchup against the Carolina Panthers would suggest that he might be in for a big day. But again, at 7,400, and then you look at Tom Brady. Tom Brady's a really safe play. And he would be my choice in terms of high-dollar guys because his matchup is much, much better than Aaron Rodgers. Much, much better since Brady's going against the Redskins, who are soft in the secondary. The Patriots love to throw the ball a lot. And when you look at Tom Brady, if you're going to devote big money to a quarterback, in this case, $8,500 this week, you got to look for a guy that's going to be guaranteed to produce and guaranteed to give you a big number. And every single start this year, Tom Brady has at least produced on DraftKings a minimum of 25 points. So that's a good way to go. If you're going to go with a high-dollar guy, for my money, you got to go with Tom Brady. You got to go with one of the leading MVP candidates in the league. You got to go with that beast who is going to throw the ball. He has Gronk and Edelman and a bunch of different weapons, Deion Lewis out of the backfield to throw to. If you're going to go high-dollar, he's the way to go. My best play for the week is a middle of the road guy, and that's Phillip Rivers at 6,900. The past 5 weeks, he's thrown for at least 300 yards with a 500-yard game against the Green Bay Packers sandwiched in there at $6,900. He's got a decent sized price tag, but it's not so prohibitive or huge that it really restricts you on how you can construct together the rest of your lineup, especially if you're going to double him up with guys that I'll talk about in a little bit at the wide receiver and tight end position. When you look at Phillip Rivers, the consistency of performance, at least 24 points each of the past 5 weeks. Heading into a matchup on Monday night against the Chicago Bears, where the Bears secondary isn't all that good, might mean a Chargers team that can't really run the ball all that well is going to throw the ball a lot. And even with the loss of Keenan Allen, you would expect Phillip Rivers to continue his streak of at least throwing for 300 yards and maybe 2 touchdowns. He might not be the #1 point-scoring quarterback of the week, but he might score at a similar level to a Tom Brady and do it at a price that's $1,600 cheaper, which is huge when you're looking at the big salary cap picture. A really good low-dollar value this week at the quarterback position is going to be Tyrod Taylor of the Bills at $5,300. He's coming back healthy. He missed 2 games, and he had the bye week to prepare for Miami. Tyrod Taylor's a guy. He's had a couple of games where he scored about 15 points, but he's had games where he's put up 23, 24, 29 points. And when you look at a guy at $5,300, he's a guy that could throw for some yardage. He's also a guy that could run for some yardage. And when you think about it from a DraftKings standpoint, quarterbacks passing yards, it takes 25 of them to get a point. Running the ball, it only takes 10 yards to get a point. So a Tyrod Taylor at 5,300 might be a better bet to score 25 points than, let's say, a Jay Cutler at 5,200, who is primarily only a threat to throw the football. There's more dimensions to Tyrod Taylor. I know it's kind of scary when you look at that Bills offense because there's not a lot of explosiveness to it. But when you look at the value, when you look at the low dollar figure this week, compared to the salary cap of $5,300. And when you look at some of the previous performances that Tyrod Taylor has had this year, you have to look at him as a pretty good value. And when you've looked at some of the big money winners in the Millionaire Maker contest each week, one trend tends to emerge for the most part is usually those guys end up winning with a quarterback that cost them $6,400 or less. In a lot of weeks, it's $6,000 or less. And a guy like Tyrod Taylor could potentially win somebody a lot of money this week. Now, in terms of running backs, high-dollar guys, Devontae Freeman at $8,000. He's going up against a doo-doo-ass San Francisco 49ers team. He's a guy that even the last 2 weeks, he's slowed down a little bit in terms of his point production, but he still had 19 and 18 points, respectively, the past 2 games. He's a guy that's going to get 18 to 20 carries. He's going to get targeted quite a bit out of the backfield, especially with Hankerson. It looks like missing another game for the Atlanta Falcons. So he's a guy at $8,000. While that's a high number for a running back, you could sit there and say you feel good about 20 rushes and potentially 5 to 6 targets in the passing game. And when you're talking about in DraftKings, it's a point per reception. Those 5 to 6 targets, if they become catches, that's what helps Devontae Freeman in part, along with the touchdown runs, be able to score 30-plus points. And he's a good chance to do that this week. In terms of middle dollar guys, I'll look at Mark Ingram for the Saints. He's a guy at $6,500. I think that goes under the radar a little bit because of all the tension on Drew Brees. Part of the fact, too, is that Kyrie Robinson was there to vulture some of those goal line carries, and in particular goal line touchdowns that should have been Mark Ingram's. You look at it, though, Kyrie Robinson is out now. CJ Spiller, Marcus Murphy, these are not guys that are big threats to take away a lot of carries from Mark Ingram, most especially and most importantly of all in the goal line situations. Mark Ingram has also stepped up this year as a pass catcher out of the backfield, which again, point per reception in DraftKings contest, that makes all the difference in the world. So at $6,500, a decent value. DeMarco Murray at $6,400 is a bit of a risk, probably a big risk, especially when you look at the performance he had in week 2 against the Dallas Cowboys. You know, Murray's had a couple of really good games, and he's had a few games that are not so good. I like this a little bit more this week just because of the fact of, number one, Ryan Matthews is limited, and he may or may not play, and even if he does, he has a questionable tag. I wonder how much he's actually going to tote the rock, and I'm not sure how much Sproles is going to play out of the backfield, so that means perhaps plenty of opportunities for DeMarco Murray. This is a revenge game, and I like revenge games. Even if the numbers don't always indicate that you should go with the guy. A few weeks ago, Andre Johnson helped me win a few bucks when the Colts were playing Thursday night against the Houston Texans because I'm like, as much as I want to focus on Moncrief or this guy or that guy, I look at Andre Johnson, I'm like, this is a revenge game. He's going to want to perform and produce, and he ultimately did perform, and he did produce. So sometimes it's not just about the analytics or the numbers. Sometimes you go off the revenge games. Sometimes you just go off of instinct. And my instinct maybe is broken, but I think DeMarco Murray might have a nice week. And I got to look at D'Angelo Williams at 5,500. Early on in the year, if you remember the first two games for the Steelers where Le'Veon Bell was out due to suspension, he had a nice game against the New England Patriots going over 100 yards. And he had that 3-touchdown game, I believe it was, in week 2 against the San Francisco 49ers. When you look at it, D'Angelo Williams at 5,500, he's the unquestioned lead back. Pittsburgh's going to want to run the ball quite a bit. He can catch a couple of balls out of the backfield. Williams is a good play at 5,500. Now, in terms of lower dollar backs and some of the really good values I see this week, Darren McFadden at 4,300 going against the Eagles. When you look at it, the Cowboys are going to want to run behind that offensive line. McFadden, with Randall gone and Michael not being shit, is the unquestioned lead running back, and frankly should have been since the early portion of the season. He's clearly been the most talented guy all year, and now they finally went with him. I like the fact, too, that playing alongside of Noodler, Matt Castle in that Cowboys backfield, he's going to get targets in the passing game, which, again, point per reception in DraftKings contest means what? A Darren McFadden could have 5 catches and get 5 points for it. I mean, and that makes a big difference. Jonathan Stewart for the Carolina Panthers going against the Green Bay Packers. He's the unquestioned lead back in that Carolina Panthers offense. There's always that threat that a Cam Newton and or Mike Tolbert could vulture some goal line carries away. But Stewart has been running the ball better recently. The Green Bay Packers just got torched on the ground this past week by the Denver Broncos with C.J. Anderson and Ronnie Hillman both. I like the matchup for Stewart this week, especially at a price of $4,300. Again, sometimes it's not just about how much I like or really like the matchup. I could just kind of like the matchup, but have the dollar figure of $4,300 and say this guy here could help me spend more money here and get bigger players at wide receiver or maybe a bigger name quarterback like a Phillip Rivers this week. You know, you got to roll the dice with him. I also like Jeremy Langford in the Monday night game for $4,000. Matt Forte has officially been ruled out from my understanding. Going against the Chargers, Langford is going to be the clear-cut lead back. He might catch some balls out of the backfield. John Fox loves to run the football, so you would hope, if anything else, even if he doesn't have a spectacular night from an efficiency standpoint, even if he averages like 3 yards a carry, maybe he gets 20 carries, 60 yards, but maybe he could vulture a goal line touchdown out of there. Maybe he can catch 3 or 4 balls out of the backfield. You know, a guy at $4,000 at the running back position that could give you 16 to 18 points this upcoming week. It's not the worst value in the world. Now, in tight ends, you know, high dollar guys, you got to go with Gronkowski. It really doesn't matter. He's the best in the business. You know Brady's going to target him. Washington's linebackers and secondaries or corners and safeties aren't good in coverage. Gronk could have a big day. Even at $8,000, I don't like devoting $8,000 to a tight end because I think that's a big risk. And sometimes I think that's the worst thing you could do. I could understand why people would want to play Gronk this week. I think a little better play are some of the middle dollar guys, such as Antonio Gates of the Chargers at $4,700 going against the Chicago Bears. The Bears aren't terrible against tight ends, but you know with the loss of Keenan Allen that Gates is going to get a lot of targets, especially if Ladarius Green ends up missing the game, the other tight end in that Chargers system. And you look at it, the Bears might not be terrible against tight ends, but they usually don't face a lot of guys like Antonio Gates. So Antonio Gates could be in line for a big day. At $4,700, you know, he's a guy that's going to be a top red zone target for Phillip Rivers. If I'm anticipating him throwing for over 300 yards and maybe 2 to 3 touchdowns, Gates is probably going to get 8 or 9 of those targets and probably going to get at least one of those touchdowns. Delaney Walker for the Titans at $4,300. I think he's a solid play this week going up against a New Orleans secondary that all the talk about Drew Brees' performance last week. Let's not forget that Eli Manning shredded the Saints secondary too. He threw for 6 touchdown passes and I believe over 400 yards. He had a monster day. So you look at a guy like a Delaney Walker coming in. Marcus Mariota's coming back. He's going to lean a little bit on his tight end, you would think, and especially with the Kendall Wright being out of action. Not a lot there outside of perhaps like another guy I'll talk about here in a moment. I like Delaney Walker at $4,300. He's a guy that could get 8 or 9 targets, maybe 60, 70 yards, and a touchdown. It would be a nice day for that low salary figure. Low dollar tight ends, maybe Zach Ertz for $3,200 for the Philadelphia Eagles. There's not a lot here for me to say why I like it, other than the fact of at some point in time he's got to catch a touchdown pass this week or this year, and I think it comes this week. So at $3,200, they give you a couple of catches for 40, 50 yards and a touchdown. That's pretty good value as your number 1 tight end, or if you slip him into his flex option. In terms of another tight end, I say Heath Miller. Big Ben is back. He's had a nice game last week. He's had some really good performances when Big Ben's been the starter this year, and at $2,700, he presents a really, really, really good low-dollar value for you to play. In terms of wide receivers now, high dollar guys. I like Antonio Brown this week at $8,100 against the Raiders. It's no slight or disrespect to the Raiders or their defense at all. It's just the fact that Big Ben will be back for another week. Antonio Brown and Big Ben have tremendous chemistry. At some point in time, Antonio Brown's due with some of the struggles he had earlier on in the season playing with guys like Landry Jones and before that, especially Michael Vick. Antonio Brown's due for a big game. It's coming at some point in time, and I think it could come this week. Demaryius Thomas of the Broncos at 7,500. The Colts secondary is not very good, especially once you get outside of Vontae Davis outside. So the Broncos, I'm sure, are going to try and line up Thomas all over the place. He gets plenty of targets. As Peyton Manning looks to be a little bit better and more effective stretching the ball down the field, at least in the 15 to 20-yard range, it could be a big day on Sunday for Demaryius Thomas against that Colts secondary. Some middle dollar guys that I really, really like this week, especially guys like Mike Evans and Alshon Jeffrey. Evans at 6,800. You're looking at him. There's no Vincent Jackson. He's going up against a Giants secondary that, again, just got shredded for 7 touchdown passes by Drew Brees and a shit ton of yardage and still doesn't have Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, I believe. Mike Evans could be in store for a big afternoon, even with another potential low-dollar tight end giving you some value in a returning Austin Severian-Jenkins, who might be another guy that you would want to consider, by the way, as a low-dollar play at 2,800, because you saw the chemistry him and Jameis Winston had early on in the season before ASJ hurt his shoulder. But I like Evans quite a bit. I really, really like Alshon Jeffrey this week, though, at 6,700. I know you're almost thrown off like, what? This is a fantasy football standpoint. The past 2 games that Alshon Jeffrey has started, he's gone over 100 yards receiving. He's had a touchdown. He's averaged over 30 points per game in DraftKings contest. At 6,700, you're not going to find a lot of guys that will average 30 points per game. And I look at the matchup again against the San Diego Chargers. Eddie Royal may be out, and even if he wasn't out, what does that really matter? The team doesn't consistently count on Marquise Wilson to do a whole lot. Martellus Bennett at tight end has his moments, but Alshon Jeffrey is beyond question the clear-cut #1 target. And what you're looking for guys in this dollar range, in my opinion, between the $5,000 to $7 range, you're looking for those guys that are going to be the #1 wide receivers, that are going to play in games that potentially have a lot of throwing opportunities, meaning they're going to get a lot of targets, a lot of catches, perhaps a lot of yards, and maybe even some touchdown opportunities. And I envision all of that happening for Alshon Jeffrey on Monday night. And then I look at Eric Decker for 5,300 with the Jets taking on the Jaguars. Some of you might say, well, Allen Robinson, Allen Hurns. I don't know if I like their matchup against that Jets secondary that much. Although one of those 2 guys, you could always say it this way, I think, is that one week either Hurns or Robinson is going to have the big week. One week it's Robinson, the next week it's Hurns, the next week it's Robinson, the next week it's Hurns. So flip a coin, make your choice. You could probably pick one of them, although I might lean towards Hurns a little bit more this week. Eric Decker, 5,300. Brandon Marshall is questionable, may play, maybe not. But even if he does play, how effective might he be? Eric Decker gets some opportunities. This is a guy with 5 touchdown catches on the year, averaging almost 70 yards receiving per game. He gets targets, he gets some yards, and he gets targets in the red zone. It makes a big difference. He might not score you 35 points, but he has the potential to comfortably give you at least 15, if not 20 points. In terms of low-dollar values, I like 2 Chargers a lot on Monday night. I like Malcolm Floyd at 3,900. The one thing that scares me about him is that when it comes to Chargers receivers, you just never know with the way Phillip Rivers spreads the ball out. You might look at it and say, no Keenan Allen, a somewhat still dinged up Antonio Gates. Malcolm Floyd should clearly be the #1 wide receiver, which means that Phillip Rivers will throw the ball to Danny Woodhead 14 fucking times out of the backfield, or he'll throw a touchdown pass to Dontrell Inman, or whoever the fuck else. But at 3,900, he's going to be the #1 target outside. You would hope that would equate to some targets, and in particular, when you're talking about Malcolm Floyd, he brings you a big red zone target, and he also presents some opportunities to hit big plays down the field. So you got to like him again at 3,900. I also like Stevie Johnson for 3,200. Phillip Rivers likes to throw to that slot guy. He liked to throw to Eddie Royal, who in the past had that history of having some really big games and then doing nothing in others. No Keenan Allen again. Stevie Johnson only 3,200. You got to figure he'll be starting outside. He'll be lining up in the slot. He'll be getting a lot of opportunities throughout the game, especially if Phillip Rivers is going to throw for over 300 yards, which I anticipate he would. I really like Stevie Johnson as a wide receiver 3 or more so flex play this week at 3,200. And then one other guy that I'll throw out there as a complete flyer is going to be Dorial Green-Beckham of the Titans taking on the Saints at 3,100. Again, the Saints just got shredded by Eli Manning for 6 touchdown passes, 3 of them to Odell Beckham Jr. I look at Dorial Green-Beckham. We're waiting for him to break out. It's going to happen. Some week it's going to happen. And there's going to be a week this year, I feel, in my opinion, where Dorial Green-Beckham, at the low salary that he has, is going to have a big monster game, and he's going to win somebody a lot of money, and he probably would be on somebody's $1 million winning team as a wide receiver 3 as a flex option. That's how strongly I feel about it. I think it's coming at some point in time. It could come this week. No Kendall Wright for the Tennessee Titans. Marcus Mariota is going to be back. The Titans finally have realized that, hey, the fucker's 6'5", and he can move, and he can jump, and he can catch. Let's throw it to him a few more times. Let's give him some more opportunities to make plays happen. I bet you he can make some plays happen. I wouldn't be surprised if this week he had 6 catches, 50 yards, and a touchdown. You might say, whoopee, that's 17 points on DraftKings. That's 17 points out of a guy that you only spent $3,100 on. That's a really, really, really good flex play, and I think personally that he's worth the gamble this week, even though you don't have a lot of previous history to indicate that he's going to have that big breakout game. Sometimes that's what happens. You just have to guess, and you have to guess right. In terms of defense and special teams this week, when I look at defense and special teams on DraftKings contests, I will always advise people not to put too much effort or thought into it, because a lot of times the defenses that are the best don't always score the best from a fantasy standpoint, and the defenses that you think are going to have the best weeks a lot of times don't. You're looking for the potential for 3 things with these teams. Points allowed is only somewhat important in my opinion. You look for teams that could get turnovers, that can sack the quarterback, and have the potential to take a turnover or some type of special teams play back to the house for a touchdown. You're looking for some of those combinations of things. Sometimes 1 or 2 of those categories outweigh the others. But again, when you look at defense and special teams, this is one of the 9 lineup spots on DraftKings contest. This is a real opportunity for you to save some money in your lineup. It really is. You can either go higher on the totem pole for defenses, like with the Atlanta Falcons this week, taking on the 49ers at 3,400. That's got to be the #1 fantasy defense heading into this week in terms of the matchup. They're going up against Blaine fucking Gabbert, absolutely nothing at running back, Anquan Bolden being out, Vernon Davis is traded, a complete freaking mess. I'd be stunned if the Falcons didn't, at least if anything else, end up as the 3rd or 4th best scoring fantasy defense this week. I'd absolutely be stunned. I'd be stunned if they didn't at least take a pick 6 back to the house on Gabbert's sorry ass. I'd be stunned if they didn't sack him 3 or 4 times, if they didn't pick him off 2 or 3 times, force 1 or 2 fumbles. I'm not saying the Falcons will finish as the #1 fantasy defense this week, but all indicators point to at $3,400. If you're trying to play it safe and guarantee yourself a defense that's at least going to give you 10 points or more, it's got to be the Falcons this week. Now, you look at the Vikings, though, at $3,100. I like them a little bit more than the Rams defense because the Vikings defense comes a few $100s cheaper. I think there's a little less on the Rams offense because outside of Todd Gurley and Tavon Austin, what do you really have? I look at that Minnesota Vikings defense. They've only allowed 20-plus points 3 out of their 7 games this year. They're a team that can get to the quarterback. They can force some turnovers. At $3,100, I think they're solid value. The Denver Broncos, I was a little surprised with them only being $3,000. One pattern you'll notice on DraftKings is that the salaries associated with players, they're usually a week behind in updating. And here's what I mean. A couple of weeks ago, Todd Gurley had a big game. And then the next week, everybody knew, I think, that he was going to have a monster game. I most certainly knew he did. But his salary was only $5,000. The reason being is DraftKings for, let's say, week 5 is basing it off of weeks 1 to 3. Number 4 doesn't really get into a factor until week 6, if that makes sense. So my thinking is maybe that the Denver Broncos are only $3,000 this week because of a couple of weeks back. But even when you look at last week against the Green Bay Packers, they got to Rodgers a ton. You know, they dominated that game, and you head into the game against Andrew Luck and the Indianapolis Colts. Now, for all the shit-talking people are going to want to do about the Colts, and understandably so, the simple fact of the matter is the Colts have kind of had Peyton Manning's number. Andrew Luck has kind of had Peyton Manning's number. But you also look at the reality of the situation now. This Denver Broncos defense behind, in my opinion, the real coach of the year in the NFL right now, Wade Phillips, is playing outstanding defense. Luck is going to turn the ball over a couple of times, you would assume. That bad offensive line is going to surrender a lot of sacks, you would think. So the Broncos, you're looking at Andrew Luck's propensity to turn the ball over. You're looking at the fact that the Colts can't pass protect very well, so a lot of sacks. You're getting 2 points per turnover, 1 point per sack. It's easy to envision that even if the Broncos surrender 24, 27 points to the Colts offense that the Broncos defense could still score 15 or 20 points this week, if not more, by maybe taking one back to the house. A couple other lower end defenses I like this week. The Eagles at 2,700. The last time them and the Cowboys played in week 2, the Cowboys put up a 19-point defensive effort. I think this time the Eagles can. Again, you're looking at a team that can force some turnovers, that can get some type of pressure on the quarterback. The fact that they're playing somebody like a Matt Castle who is prone to turn the ball over, even though he's supposed to be a game manager. As a result, you have no threat of him stretching the ball vertically down the field, meaning you could shrink your defense, which allows you to do a lot of different things. And this is an Eagles team that can score some points on defense, either by taking one back to the house or in the return game with somebody like a Darren Sproles or a Josh Huff. There's always that potential there. So I could go with either defense in that Sunday night game, the Cowboys or the Eagles. I think the Eagles have more potential to score as a defense, and that's why I'll go with them. And then at the end of the day, the last one I'll give you is the New Orleans Saints at 2,200. Like I said, part of this is don't overthink the defense too much, because at the end of the day, I've seen people win the $1 million contest with a defense that gives them 4 points. I've also seen it other weeks where the defense gives them 20-plus points. It helps. It makes a difference. But it's not the be-all, end-all. When you look at the Saints, $2,200 for one of those 9 slots, that means you would have $47,800 left to devote to the remaining other 8 slots on your roster. That gives you an average of, what, $6,000 per. Going with somebody like the Saints, going against a team like the Tennessee Titans, who knows how Mariota is going to play coming back off an injury, a Tennessee Titans team that just fired their head coach, Ken Wisenhunt. The Saints defense might give you 7, 8 points this week. It's not going to be a ton. But that 7 or 8 points at $2,200 means that you're able to take that salary cap money and invest it in the rest of the roster. It can make all the difference in the world. So, sorry this ended up being so long. I'll figure out a way to kind of narrow this down a little bit going forward, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions for me between now and before Sunday's contest begins for the Millionaire Maker and other DraftKings contests, feel free to tweet me at the Jeff Schlegel on Twitter. I will talk to you later.